Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hi.
Before we talk about the Trump agenda per se and the Trump government, because now we can kind of see what the Trump government looks like. It's a government of generals and oligarchs. It's quite something, really. It's an extremist cabinet, for sure. But before we do that, I want to frame some of the bigger issues that our movement is facing, because as both Yasmina and Sarah said, as soon as the shocking results came out that Donald Trump had won, people went into the streets, and there seemed to be like an ascendant sort of unity against this right-wing, racist, anti-woman, xenophobic, I don't know, you could just keep, the adjectives could just keep flowing in terms of what he was. But since then, there are divisions that naturally occur within that broader movement, because there are some people who are really all about the Democratic Party, all about having elected Hillary Clinton. Then there's people who didn't vote at all, or who voted for Bernie Sanders, or like our party, we were a socialist party. We urged people, say in the state of New York, who were registered Democrats, if they were going to vote for Bernie Sanders. But we ran an independent socialist campaign with Gloria La Riva and Eugene Puryear, and Eugene is here. And that campaign actually, as a socialist and Marxist campaign, received more votes than any other socialist candidate since 1976, in other words, 40 years. Which was also a sign of the times that there's a greater interest in socialism. And as we know from the Bernie Sanders campaign, even when he was red-baited, which was from the first moment of the first CNN debate, when he gave his definition of what socialism was, instead of, Anderson Cooper said, well, you're a socialist, nobody who's a socialist can possibly win the presidency. And he said, well, let me explain to you what I mean by socialism. And over the course of the next few minutes, literally the next hour, he got about $2 or $3 million more in donations online, which was an indication that the old terrible red baiting that has so dominated American politics for so long, it was starting to lift. The fog of anti-communism was starting to lift. And anti-communism or anti-socialism really had become the unofficial religion of the United States right after World War II. During the Cold War, when anyone who was a socialist was considered an agent of an enemy power, the Soviet Union, etc., etc. And the Communist Party, which was 100,000 members and probably 1 million sympathizers in 1945, by 1955 had been reduced to about 5,000 people. And that was the demolition of this very large, vibrant socialist movement, which had led the labor movement, had led the peace movement, certainly had been the leadership of the black civil rights movement in the South. It became extinguished, in essence. And then there was the rise of the civil rights movement, starting with Rosa Parks and the struggle against segregated busing in Montgomery, Alabama, that spread. But the left, the communist left, the socialist left, which had been really the leadership of that movement, was not present, and nor could it be present. Even the leftists and communists and socialists who were working with Martin Luther King, they had to hide sort of in the corner, because, and Dr. King knew, and they knew that if it became visible that they were even present, that they would be already, they were already being horribly red-baited, Dr. King was. So there was a submergence of the left. And the 2016 campaign, which is so remarkable in so many different ways, was an indicator that it was possible again for the left to reemerge as a main force within the U.S. body politic. And Sanders was in many ways the embodiment of that. That was very significant, very important, and it came from below. The Democratic Party establishment tried to crush it in all possible ways. But it rose and became ascendant. And yet here we are a year later with Donald Trump as the president. I mean, the dichotomy and the contradictory nature of the situation couldn't be really more profound. That Sanders showed the possibility of a left-wing insurgency. And Trump also demonstrated the right-wing insurgency, which was also against the center or against the neoliberal capitalist elites. The left-wing insurgency under Sanders folded its tent when Sanders didn't get the nomination and he supported Hillary Clinton. And the Trump insurgency basically fused with a significant section of the Republican Party establishment and then won the election. I mean, that was a shock. Now, of course, Trump didn't really win the election. He lost the election. He got almost 3 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. But because he got a few more votes in some battleground swing states, he is now the president-elect. So there's that big picture, but I want to talk about the confusion, the schisms, the divisions within our movement that have come about now, because you could start to see them even during the 2016 campaign, because you had the Sanders movement, which was really battling Hillary Clinton. There were like two Democratic parties. There was the Democratic Party of the insurgent, young, working class, and socialist-led movement, however, maybe not exactly our kind of socialism, but it was there, against Hillary Clinton. And now the movement against Trump is sort of showing some of the same contours of division. And we can't be effective as a movement if we don't have a deeper political understanding of what's going on, and also to find a way to locate where we are in that division. Like, we're uniting the movement against Trump, but we're also aware that there are differences, different tendencies, different trends, different political orientations. And knowing about that is extremely important. We cannot be activists alone. Just protesting by itself is insufficient. We have to have political clarity and the ability to have a conception and a vision and a program that can reach broader parts of the population in a compelling and persuasive way. Just protesting, and we are all about protesting, but by itself it's insufficient. In fact, I would say the people who are rallying around the Democratic Party now, who are also against Trump, are pursuing a fundamentally reactionary and self-defeating strategy at the moment. They are trying, for instance, to get the Electoral College to not vote for Donald Trump. And on what basis? That Russia, the Russian menace, Vladimir Putin personally, interfered with and was so effective in his interference that he tossed the election to Donald Trump, which on its face is completely absurd because, again, Hillary Clinton actually won. I mean, if he was tilting the election, he didn't do a very good job because she won the popular vote by almost 3 million. And it's very hard to make the case that the 10 or 12,000 workers in Wisconsin who voted for Trump instead of Clinton, they weren't like putting their ear to the ground and saying, gosh, I don't know about Russia. They're not thinking about Russia taking over America. It's absurd on its face. They're thinking about jobs. And Hillary Clinton didn't even go to Wisconsin. And all she did from the Democratic convention until the election was talk about Russia, Russia, Russia. And her minions at the convention were chanting, USA, USA, USA. I mean, the Democratic Party convention sounded like the old Republican Ronald Reagan conventions from the 1980s. And her whole conception was, if we move to the right, then we'll steal the thunder of the right. And we'll show that, like the right, we're talking in the same way. But it was completely lost on the electorate, especially in industrial battleground states, who actually only care about the fact that they don't have jobs. And they don't have decent paying jobs. In Indiana, where Trump just said he saved 1,100 jobs at Carrier, which of course was a lie because he always lies, it was 680 jobs. And that's because Carrier was given by Mike Pence, the governor of Indiana, $7 million in tax breaks for the next 10 years. In other words, just a tax giveaway to them. And they're still taking 550 jobs and going to Mexico. And their other plant, which is about a mile away, is taking the whole plant to Monterrey, Mexico. But in the state of Indiana, right now, in the next couple of weeks, 5,000 more industrial jobs are going to be gone. There's been 150,000 manufacturing jobs lost in Indiana since the year 2000. There's been 5 million industrial jobs that have been lost in the United States since the year 2000. Vast parts of the industrial heartland have been hollowed out by corporations that were making lots of money and huge profits where they were, but they went abroad because they could make even greater profits for their investors. Because that's the nature of capitalism, how to maximize profits. Hillary Clinton did not reach those workers. The left has not reached those workers. And so Donald Trump came in with his demagogy and said, we'll build a wall on Mexico because apparently Mexico has taken all of our jobs. We'll ban Muslims because Muslims somehow are not making America great anymore. And all that other reality show, TV, sensationalism, which was given 24/7 media coverage by the same media outlets that then said later, hey, we're against Trump, but they gave him 24/7 media coverage to promote his demagoguery, and parts of the working class in those states voted for Trump instead of Clinton. But even more telling, statistically, is that 6 million fewer Democrats voted in 2016 than voted in 2012. And many of them were in urban areas, and many of them were in industrial states. In other words, they didn't vote for Trump, they just didn't vote. If Bernie Sanders had in fact run against Donald Trump, he would have crushed Donald Trump in this election. The only way Donald Trump could become president is to have as his opponent Hillary Clinton representing the neoliberal capitalist elites. Trump could not have done it. He's not popular. He's unpopular. As Yasmina said, 25% of the vote. That's it. And they're running around acting like he has a mandate. So one part of the Democratic Party is saying, we have to stop Trump because he's an agent of Putin. Because his great sin was, he said, why shouldn't we have friendly relations with Russia? As if that's like, a sign that he's making a pact with the devil. Like a lot of people, even like 8 years ago when Hillary Clinton was then first Secretary of State and Obama came in, they said, let's press the reset button with Russia. Let's improve relations with Russia. Now if you say you want to improve relations with Russia, it means you're an agent of Russia. That's the kind of witch hunting, it used to be anti-communism. Russia's not communist now. But it's got the same psychological, emotional sort of grip on the population. And because it was the Soviet Union / Russia, and now it's Russia, it sort of resonates in American political culture that you can demonize Russia. And the funny thing is they say, well, Russia was all about Trump. Well, I have a daily radio show on Radio Sputnik. It's called Loud and Clear. And Eugene has a daily radio show. It's called By Any Means Necessary. And there's a third Sputnik radio show, all produced down on K Street at our studio, called Unanimous Dissent. And every day on the Radio Sputnik, now it's the demonized Sputnik RT, we are taking our orders from Vladimir Putin, blah, blah, blah. We run shows that are completely against Donald Trump. Nobody tells us don't say that. Nobody tells us what to say at all. They have hired us, they have an alternative media, but they're being completely demonized. The Republicans are now calling for Sputnik and RT to be shut down because we're carrying out propaganda on behalf of the Russian government. And parts of the Democratic Party are echoing this. They're making that the focus. Why? Why are they against Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State in Donald Trump's cabinet? Is it because he's the head of ExxonMobil? Is it because he's an oligarch? Is it because he's in charge of a company that more than any other company, because it's the biggest energy oil company in the world, wants to bring more carbon out of the planet at the very moment that we have to be keeping the carbon in the ground? No, they're attacking Rex Tillerson because he's a friend of Vladimir Putin. Well, he's not a friend of Vladimir Putin. He had a friendly relationship with Russia because he wanted to drill in the Arctic. And you can't really get the permission of a foreign government to drill in their country unless you maintain friendly relations. But now that too has become the source of the Democratic Party's attack. You can attack Rex Tillerson and all of the cabinet members for a million things, but they're attacking him for being Russia, agent of Russia. That's such an absurd, ridiculous strategy. And you know, we had in our volunteers meetings for the inauguration meeting, where we're asking people to make posters and memes and buttons. Some of them were making posters of Trump and Putin, some of the volunteers who are coming around us, because that's what people are hearing in the media. Trump is about Russia. Trump is going to be like the agent of Russia. This is coming from the Democratic Party. I mean, we have to reject that. If we're going to be, we can't all be in the same big tent against Trump without differentiation if it means adopting the program in the position of the most reactionary, vile sort of bigotry and discrimination, in this case directed against Russia. I mean, we could talk a lot about why Russia and U.S. relations have deteriorated, but that's not my point. My point is we have to reject the Democratic Party's concept that the way to fight Trump is to fight Trump as the agent of Russia. Obama spoke today. Now here's another element of what we're fighting against, because Obama was against Trump, but as soon as Trump won, Obama met with Trump and he said, we had a great talk, and I'm sure Trump came out and said, he really loved me, because he says that about everybody who doesn't insult him. They loved me. It was great. Really great talk. Really good talk. But what did Obama actually say? He said, we know it's hard to lose an election, but at the end of the election, we all have to come together because we're all part of the same team. He said it's like an intramural scrimmage. These are his words. I'm paraphrasing, but it's almost verbatim. This was like an intramural scrimmage. At the end of the day, we're all on the same team. And then he said to the media while he was sitting next to Trump, we want him to succeed because if he succeeds, the country succeeds. Really? I mean, the Republicans have kicked Obama in the teeth constantly, every moment since he took office. I mean, when he adopted the Affordable Health Care Act as his signature achievement, which is a Republican health care plan. It's Mitt Romney's health care plan. The Republicans said, communist! That's a communist program. And they organized the Tea Party and all of those mass protests where they carried guns against Obama for adopting a Republican health care plan. If Obama said the sun rises in the east, the Republicans would have said, no, it doesn't. I mean, there's nothing Obama could say that the Republicans wouldn't oppose. And yet, when the Republicans, the right wing, comes into office, Obama's there like, we want you to succeed. My goal, my mission is to help a peaceful transition to power. He's been acting like his advisor, like Trump's advisor. There are some people who have suggested that James Mad Dog Mattis, the new Secretary of Defense, was actually the suggestion of President Obama to Trump in one of those private meetings. We can't accept this. We have to understand this is the people who are managing the capitalist system. So Obama feels fundamentally is the steward of the capitalist system, so he has an obligation as the CEO of the capitalist ship, as its captain, to make sure that the next captain, comes in and it's all working. But what would it mean if Trump succeeds? He's saying, I will deport 3 or 4 million immigrants. That's 1/4 of all the undocumented people. That's breaking up a vast part of America's immigrant families and sending them back. What does it mean if he succeeds in terms of women? Success for Trump will mean the complete evisceration of women's right to control their own bodies, because that's a top priority of the Republican Party. all of these misogynist, rich, billionaire men have prioritized the elimination of women's rights and abortion rights. That might not be that important to Trump as a person, because he's gone back and forth on all these things, but he's in a block with the right-wing Christian Republicans, and that's what they're going to do. That's what it means for Trump to succeed. The new labor secretary, Pudzer, I mean, what does it mean for him to succeed? To eliminate unions, to crush unions, to roll back the minimum wage, to get rid of living labor in his fast food restaurants and replace them with robots, because as he said, robots are never late and they don't talk back. The head of the EPA believes that climate change is a complete hoax. As a matter of fact, the only person in the Trump cabinet who believes that climate change is real is Rex Tillerson, the ExxonMobil guy, the one who's actually extracting all the oil. He says it's real, but he doesn't care. The rest of them think it's not real. He says it's real, but he doesn't care. He says, yeah, it's real. I'm a businessman, so I'm into risk management. ExxonMobil was the company that verified that climate change was happening exponentially, that it was moving towards an irreversible tipping point as a consequence of human activity, as the consequence of the reliance on fossil fuels. ExxonMobil researchers were the ones who found this out 40 years ago and then concealed it and then built the infrastructure of climate deniers. They've been paying these so-called scientists, these hucksters and frauds, to conceal and to create confusion about the reality of climate change. So Rex Tillerson knows it's real, doesn't care, and has done everything possible not only to conceal it, but also to file lawsuits against environmentalists so that the genuine, authentic environmental movement will be tied up in knots in court cases. So Obama wants him to succeed because if he succeeds, we all succeed. Wow. So what about education? If Betsy DeVos succeeds, public schools are going to be essentially eliminated over the next decade or two. That's what success means for these people. She's never taught in a public school. She never went to a public school. She doesn't have an education degree. She's a billionaire who is trying to make money off of the hype about charter schools and voucher program. She is the sister of Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater Mercenary Company that now has changed its name for 3 or 4 times because they committed so many war crimes in Iraq. That's her family. Eric Prince, who's also been on the campaign trail for Trump. Michael Flynn, National Security Advisor. He was the one running around leading chants, lock her up about Clinton. I mean, like, okay, now he's the National Security Advisor. And he's the one who's been publishing tweets about Pizzagate. Stay away from Comet. Could be shot up again. The Flynn family's involved. His son was finally fired from the Trump campaign because even after the guy went in there and shot up Comet Pizza a couple of weeks ago, the son, Michael Flynn, who was also part of the Trump transition team, was tweeting, well, it still might be real, you know, even after the guy shut the place up. So they had to ditch him. But Michael Flynn is an Islamophobe par excellence. He is a lunatic, racist pig. He got fired as the director in the DIA because he was considered by the other people in the Pentagon to be unstable. He couldn't stop writing tweets about how fear of Islam is rational. I mean, this is the leader of the U.S. military. Fear of Islam is rational. He's been involved in every kind of war against Muslims and all kinds of brutalities and atrocities against Muslims. And then who's the Secretary of Defense? James Mad Dog Mattis. And that, you know, he was the one who talked Trump out of supporting torture. I mean, Trump is going around saying, yeah, we should do waterboarding and much, much worse. And we should find ISIS family members and kill them. children. He was saying all those things on the campaign trail. So, so Mattis met with him and said, torture doesn't work. Which of course is the consensus opinion by almost everyone in the Pentagon, because it actually doesn't work as a way of getting information. And Mattis told Trump, he said, give me a couple 6-packs of beer and a couple packs of cigarettes and I'll get more information than from waterboarding. So Trump changed his mind. That was all that it took. I'm going to get rid of the torture idea because he said, if somebody named Mad Dog told me that torture doesn't work, I have to listen. Wow. James Mad Dog Mattis, he's the one who was saying in training, it's fun to shoot people, about his experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's now the Secretary of Defense. It's really fun to shoot people, meaning Muslims. He's the Secretary of Defense. Jeff Sessions is the Attorney General. Okay, that's like having George Wallace in charge of the Justice Department. Because Jeff Sessions, he doesn't say the words that George Wallace said, but he has George Wallace's program. When you're a conservative in Alabama and you're so overtly racist that you can't get affirmed as a federal district court judge appointed by Ronald Reagan, which is what happened to Jeff Sessions, he could not be confirmed because of his overt anti-black racism. He's been the main champion in the U.S. Senate against any comprehensive immigration reform. He's the Attorney General. So, do we want them to succeed, as President Obama said? Because if they succeed, we all succeed. Obviously, that's unacceptable to most of the population. So, my bottom line sort of point that I want to make before we open the floor for discussion is when you look at this constellation of forces, you look at what the Trump agenda really is going to be. It's going to be an extremist agenda on the environment, on women's rights, on unions, on tax breaks for the rich, draining the national treasury so that there's no money for the poor, privatizing eventually Medicare and Medicaid. In other words, really undoing, as Yasmina said, every social reform of the past 80 years. That's what they're doing. When you see what the agenda is and you look around, you have to come to the conclusion. If you're looking at the same things that I'm looking at, the conclusion that we draw in the PSL is that the ruling class per se, however you want to characterize the dominant capitalist establishment in America, they were not for Donald Trump during the campaign. They thought Trump would make the country look like a laughingstock. They thought he was an extremist. They were mainly afraid that he would become a magnet for mass protest if he were to be elected. But you can see what Obama's saying about wanting him to succeed, and the way Trump Tower has become the new Mecca, where all the different parts of the capitalist establishment are going on bended knee to genuflect in front of Trump. That right now the ruling class, while nervous about Trump, actually is hoping that he does succeed. They want him to succeed. Because what the Trump administration means in a fundamental way is the redistribution of wealth from the bottom to the top. Like what Ronald Reagan tried in the 1980s and did do in the 1980s, eliminating big parts of the social safety net, and then Clinton followed that up in the 1990s with the elimination of welfare and other protections. What the Trump cabinet, when you look at it, the oligarchs and generals, the real program is to eliminate all environmental, labor, social, civil right protections that have in some way become an obstacle to maximizing profits for corporations. That's what it's all about. It's not really about the social issues per se. I don't think Trump gives a damn about it. I don't think the Secretary of Commerce, who's another billionaire, Wilbur Ross, who I didn't mention, they're all billionaires, right-wing billionaires. What they really want to do is reconfigure America so that trickle-down economics under Reagan, for those of us who are old enough to know what that was, will look sort of like a Tea Party compared to what's coming. And they feel that not only will this give them greater fortunes as a class, but it will improve America's standing in the global economy. The United States has slipped in relationship to emerging markets. and especially towards China. The other thing in terms of foreign policy, Trump might, and I wanted to end on the last point, but I'll end on this point. Obama had this press conference today, very interesting because he talked about Syria, he talked about Russia, he confirmed that the FBI, the CIA, and now the White House are confirming that Russia really did try to interfere with the elections and they're going to retaliate against Russia. He also used this press conference to attack China more. And if you see what Donald Trump did do on foreign policy, soon after being elected, he took the call from the president of Taiwan, so-called, because Taiwan is a province of China, not really a country. But he took that call, and at first it was treated as sort of a, well, he didn't know what he was doing, and Trump said, well, if we sell them billions of dollars of arms every year, why can't I take a congratulatory call? What's the big deal? But of course, we now know that that call was long planned. The Heritage Foundation, the ultra-right Heritage Foundation, that inserted a pro-Taiwan, anti-PRC, anti-People's Republic of China plank in the Republican platform at the convention in July. They arranged that trip, that call months earlier. And then Trump has now said, we should not be bound by the one China policy. Now, I know most of us don't really have a sense of that, but I can tell you the Chinese people, who constitute 1 out of every 4 humans on the planet, they know very well what that means. That means the United States violating the fundamental and foundational element of U.S.-China bilateral relations that were established first by Nixon and then formalized by Jimmy Carter in 1979. It recognizes that Taiwan is a part of China, has always been a part of China, and it's from the point of view of the Chinese people who suffered a century of humiliation by imperialism and by Western colonialism and had Hong Kong taken and Taiwan taken and had big parts of the Chinese mainland taken by foreigners. The whole notion of the Chinese Revolution isn't only about socialism, it's also about national unity, national independence, anti-colonialism, and Taiwan is the signal and symbol psychologically and emotionally for the Chinese people that they are not going to allow anyone like imperialism to separate China once again. And for Trump to do this is, well, I would say it's like waving a red flag, but that might have like a mixed meaning or something. You couldn't be more provocative. The Chinese government has had up until now a prudent, sort of cautious response because they don't know what they're dealing with Trump. All the countries in the world are a little bit alarmed because they don't know Trump is not a predictable politician. And the fact that he's done this shows also great unpredictability. And, you know, we live in a world filled with nuclear weapons. You know, for the younger friends here, you won't remember, but when I was a child, every week we covered up under our desks in school for anticipated nuclear war. That wasn't so long ago. In other words, the dangers of nuclear war, which of course could exterminate the species, because China has nuclear weapons, Russia has nuclear weapons, the United States has nuclear weapons. If confrontations start to get out of control, as they did 50 years ago, and almost did, it can happen again. And especially with all of the expansion of NATO on Russia's border, and now the rising prospect of disputes in the South China Seas over disputed territories and islands which are extremely important to China, and China feels it's being surrounded. Obama started it, didn't start with Trump, but Obama said the Asia pivot by 2020, that means, and that's just 4 years from now, 60% of all U.S. fighter aircraft and bombers and ships and warships and the entire flotilla of the Navy will be in the Pacific region. The Asia pivot is basically a military pivot. And so under these circumstances, Trump introduces a whole new element of uncertainty and danger into global politics. So some people on the left were thinking Trump would be better than Clinton because Clinton was so confrontational with Russia and such a regime change sort of maniac insisting on the war in Libya, supporting the war in Iraq, they thought, well, maybe Trump means something different. Trump doesn't mean anything. There might be a tactical difference about Syria. I think Trump is not going to try to overthrow the Assad government, but they're going to try to partition Syria into a pro-American sphere of influence and a pro-Assad government-controlled area. I think that's what's coming with Trump. He said last night he's for safe zones in Syria. That's something new. He didn't say that before. That I believe, is the influence of General Mattis from the Pentagon. In other words, the Pentagon's moving in and telling Trump what his foreign policy will be in the Middle East. Anyway, I'm pretty much done. We wanted to go through the different tendencies and trends, because if we're just out there like, say, down with Trump, and we don't sort of understand the complexity of the social and political sort of battlefield that we're on, we won't really be able to navigate our way very well. And we can't succeed, again, simply to be activists. We have to be thinkers, we have to study, we have to read, we have to talk to each other, we have to pay careful attention to evolving politics, and craft our strategy and our tactics, and of course our message to working folks in a way that corresponds to reality. So thank you very much.